Part 63 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger. In this part, an LAPD officer, another one, takes the stand, and then I take the stand. Okay, so we're still on July 13th of 2021, and another officer, Detective Keith Gonzales, gets on the stand. He wasn't on the scene the night of the incident, of the attack, but he did the follow-up investigation. So this is like the week after the incident. We're going to and from the LAPD to identify the Drizzes and all of the photos that the police provided. I talked about this in part 3 of my series. So here's the interesting thing. He got a lot of facts wrong on the stand. Detective Gonzales said that he called Alberto Driz himself and that he used his sources to get Alberto's number. But as I already went over in part 3, Sergeant Yearwood, who was sergeant at the time, he retired a few months later after the incident, but Sergeant Yearwood is the one that dealt with us. He's the one that made the call in front of us and was like, shh, I'm going to call Alberto Driz. I'm not going to tell him he's a suspect. I'm putting him on speakerphone and we're going to hear what he says. And we're like, how'd you get his number? And the sergeant was like, oh, we found out that the Driz twins were staying at a Bel Air brothel that night for their 60th. And they knew about it, the police. And so they called the madam of this brothel. And she was like, oh, the Drizzes? Yeah, they treat my girls so terribly. Here's their cell phone number. Like, ugh, it's like, so she was very, very helpful. So then Yearwood, made the call in front of us and was like, there was an incident last week at the Nice Guy. Were you there? Do you remember anything? And Alberto was in his car driving on the phone. And he was like, oh, no, it was a really pleasant night. I don't remember anything at all. But you know what? You're cutting out right now. I can't really hear you. And if you have to talk to anyone, talk to my attorney, Robert Shapiro. But on the stand, Detective Gonzales said, transcript, once I identified Alberto Driz, Shawn Driz, the rest of them, I contacted Alberto and I called him using my sources, and he told me that I could talk to his lawyer, Bob Shapiro. And then an hour and a half later, Robert Shapiro showed up. While we were still in the LAPD, Robert Shapiro showed up with the defendants so that they could get processed and bailed out. And the thing is, the problem with that is, they were processed and bailed out, but this was assault with a deadly weapon. This was attempted unaliving. These are very serious charges. And I had, again, mentioned it previously in my series that the amazing DA that had our case through the criminal process, he was really upset. He actually showed up to court at the end of the preliminary hearing and complained to the judge. He was like, first of all, I have no idea why these men were allowed to have such an unprecedentedly low bail. Like it was like $30,000 or something like that per person. And when you have assault with a deadly weapon or attempted unaliving in the state of California, the bail on average starts around $1 million. And you don't just get booked and walk out of jail 30 minutes later, which these guys did. So $30,000, and again, you pay 10%, like literally, so if it's $30,000, you pay $3,000. Am I doing math? I don't know. But $30,000 compared to $1 million is quite different. And the DA said, also, I was never told about the arraignment. So they got to have a private arraignment somehow that Shapiro worked out. So to have a low bail, to have them released immediately onto the street. So all of this stuff was very, very, very unprecedented and strange. Oh, and the reason I said that was because on the stand, Detective Gonzales said that he had presented the case to the DA. Now he might have, but it wasn't in the time frame where the arraignment and all that stuff, because the DA literally said in the transcript, he was like, nobody told me about this. I was kept out of the arraignment. I was kept out of the bail process. So it was pretty much the defendants and Robert Shapiro, and they got to just decide everything on themselves. And then Detective Gonzales, on the stand, he says that the defendants got about 5 counts each, assault with a deadly weapon and the GBI felonies, which, reminder, means great bodily injury, and that's the charge that's just below attempted unaliving. And the judge Susan Bryant Deason, for our civil trial, she was like kind of blown away by all this information, rightfully. And so she was like, okay, well, let's, where are the transcripts for the prelim? And my attorney got up and said, we've never had the original transcripts from the prelim. Oh, I don't remember this in court. I remember it from reading the transcripts, but obviously I was probably spaced out in court or something. But I bought the transcripts. Like, I bought them in 2016. I paid thousands of dollars. Like, I have them. So I wish that I had spoken up and said, I do, but I guess I didn't. And so I could have helped my attorneys out with that, and helped the judge out so we could move things along quicker. And then randomly, Alberto Driz got up and he said that the fence that I jumped to get to the guy was 7 feet tall, which again, it was 6 feet tall. I measured it and I submitted the video. God. Okay, so next on the stand is me. My testimony was kind of spread out over 3 different days, non-consecutive, over the rest of the trial, just because we had to fit in like doctors and stuff like that had major schedules that we had to accommodate. So mine was broken up a few days, but this day, so we're still on July 13th. This was the first time I testified, but we didn't really get to anything like juicy. It was just the basics, like how old are you, where are you from, what do you do for a living? And so it's interesting going into this, this was my big day. This was, I couldn't sleep. I was trembling, and we had gotten advice from our attorneys this is basic obvious advice, but don't communicate with the jurors, don't smile at them, don't look at them. And I was still in the frame of mind, as you can understand if you've watched my series, that I had experienced nothing but corruption, prejudice, all this stuff for 6 years. I knew what was happening going into this trial. The jury didn't know about all the corruption yet. And at this point, at this stage, we're July 13th, and we still have until the 29th of July for the end of the trial. But at this point still, I had no faith in the judge. I had no faith in the jurors, because I was positive that somebody had gotten to the judge, that somebody had gotten to a few of the jurors. And I knew we had a winning case, a slam dunk, but I was so sure in my mind at this point that somebody got bribed, somebody got swayed, there was a plant. That's what I was thinking. And so the way I got up on the stand was like, okay, good. I'm here to tell my story. I fought 6 years to get here, but there was still I was drained, and I didn't have confidence in the justice system. And during this 3-week trial, I made a point of never making eye contact with any of the jurors, even when they're in the jury stand or when they were coming to and from the courtroom. I just kind of glazed my eyes over and didn't want to connect with them, because I had this lump in my stomach, these people have my life in their hands, and they're probably going to screw it up, because there's going to be a couple in there that have been gotten to. So it was just a weird feeling going up there. And by the way, I was wrong. The judge and the jury were fantastic, and I just want to tackle, hug all of them every day for the rest of my life. But I didn't know this at this point yet. I would get on the stand, and I could not bring myself to look at the jury on all 3 times I testified throughout the rest of the trial. I think maybe once or twice I glanced at them when I was making a point, but that was it. I couldn't look at them. Instead, I just drilled holes with my eyes at my attorney. I would look at the judge sometimes when she would speak to me. But a majority of the time I was on the stand, and I didn't see this coming, I would stare down the defendants. I'm answering, this person's asking me a question, the defendants are over here, and I'm listening to the question, staring each of them down. And when I'm talking, I'm staring them down. And you know what the interesting thing, not surprising thing is that every single time I was staring at the defendants, William Jolson never looked at me. He just kept his head down. He would not look at me. He was just, you could see the shame oozing off of him at least. So that's a plus for William Jolson. He actually exhibited shame for the most part. The 3 Drizzes, usually they would look away and look down every time I was staring at them and speaking. And then sometimes each of the 3 of them would stare back at me, but I'd hold their gaze, and they always dropped their eyes first. Always. It speaks volumes about who they are. Okay. So my attorney says something really basic, so where'd you grow up? And I just remembered, this was the 4th question in, and the dam broke. And I was I grew up in Connecticut. And I just started sobbing, and I just pretty much didn't stop crying after that. So basic stuff. And then the judge asks, after I get off the stand, the judge asks again to the defendants, did you bring your financial documents? And Shawn Driz says, no, I'm calling my accountant and my bankruptcy attorney. It's funny how he's so broke, but he has all that. And then Alberto Driz says, as I've said before, I'm waiting for the bank. And then the judge says, then I've cut you all the slack that I'm going to cut you. Love her. And my testimony gets continued for a later date. See you at the next part.